Hi, in this video, I'm talking through what I think are possible scenarios for Nintendo's next console. This is all part of a longer stream series where I talk through my thoughts on game design as it comes up in games I play. I also talk through various other game industry and design topics. You can find more content like this over on my Twitch channel at ProfZenStreams, linked in the description. All these things are off the top of my head, and I made minimal cuts to keep the general flow, so I'll add any corrections in the notes and in the video as I catch them. Alright, on to the video. There's been more and more speculation about the Switch 2, or what people are calling the Switch 2, which is part of the thing I want to talk about. I think it's crazy to think that Nintendo would put out a Switch 2. I think that people are using that name because it's an easy thing to call it. It's just like when, I think, what did they call the Wii U before they knew what it was? They called it the Wii 2 or something like that. But then we got the code name Revolution, and then people just use the code name. We haven't got a code name for this generation, so I guess people are defaulting to trying to add a number to a thing. But it also sounds like that's sort of going down the same path of the people's thoughts on what they think that the next Switch or the next Nintendo console is going to be. Like, people think that it's going to be a second, like just a more powerful Switch. And that's... So, what I want to talk about, basically, is that I would like to give my idea for what I think Nintendo is going to do. And I think there's like a couple options. But I think that the thing that people think it's going to be is not what it's going to be. But, so most people are talking about like the next Nintendo console being a Switch 2, like a direct successor to the Switch. I think there's a lot of precedent historically to say that that's just not going to happen. I don't think Nintendo's ever done that, except for their handhelds. But the Switch has always been messaged as being the main home console, not a handheld. Like when it was first coming out, they were like very clear, this is not a replacement for the 3DS, this is a replacement for the Wii U. So if that's still the mentality, which I believe it is, I think that there is a possibility that Nintendo does release a new Switch model, but I do not believe it will be a Switch 2. Based on historic precedent, what it would probably be closer to is like the Wii Mini was to the Wii, in that it would be a like even cheaper version of the Switch. So I think that it's possible that what they'll do is release like a Switch Lite, effectively, which will be like, if I'm thinking about this from like a home console style marketing, it could be effectively a Switch Lite, but dockable. So a cheaper version of the Switch, but you can dock it. Or it could just be a smaller, cheaper version of the Switch Lite. Or it could be just an OLED version of the Switch Lite that they are going to use as the only model that they're going to sell from that point forth. But I would only think that that would be the case if the next console is not backwards compatible. But that is what I would think of as like the next Switch model is likely to be that, not a upgrade to the Switch. I just don't see that happening. It's not something they've done before other than with their handhelds. It just doesn't really make sense from a business perspective. And like based on Nintendo's kind of model historically, it just doesn't seem like the right way to go. What I think is more likely is that we're going to get... Oh, I'm poisoned. I'll just heal that away. What I think is more likely, instead of a Switch 2, is there's a couple scenarios that could happen. Nintendo historically has a precedent of like going off with a new technology in a way that people didn't expect. Usually it's a technology that has become cheaper over the last generation of consoles and that they had played with previously. So I think that that's the place we should look at for hints, is like what have they done previously that may have become cheaper in the last generation or two that they might want to take on as a larger thing. There are a couple of possibilities of what they could do. I have a very clear image of what I'd like them to do in mind. I don't know that it's what they would do, but it would also make a lot of sense to do it for a number of reasons, and I'll get into that in a bit. But the things I could think of that they could investigate further, so they went down the rabbit hole of motion for a while, right? We had, even the current Switch has motion controls, so I think it would be silly to think that they're going to get rid of motion controls completely. I think that we're going to still have motion controls in some capacity. And the question would be, how are they going to implement it? Because it still seems to be a pretty big focus of their console, even if they're not using for all their titles, right? The Joy-Cons are basically like a version of the Wii controller, and they are useful in a bunch of games. And what that allows for also is backwards compatibility, sort of. It allows them to port things up to the console. Motion controls are definitely going to be in it in some way. That seems clear from Nintendo's kind of path that they've been down. And historically, it's made sense because it's allowed them to port things over. So they make a lot of money off of ports using new technology. So things that they wanted to maybe revisit, or that they know will... this isn't enough space? That's a huge amount of space. I'm gonna just turn around the other direction, see if I can run all the way across. So, like, a lot of their business seems to revolve around being able to port things over to a new console. It makes sense. They have a back library with a bunch of cool stuff in it. So that's going to lead into the way I think it's going to go. But other ways that they could go. So motion controls obviously being a thing. Maybe they want to go back and look at, now that the technology has been around for a little bit longer, maybe there's some type of motion control that has become cheaper that we haven't been really looking at as much, that is now worth putting into a console, that they might have a cool implementation for that would make sense. In that way, I could think of like the Valve Index controllers, where they can like track finger movement and stuff like that. That could be something that they could be investigating, because I don't like those types of sensors could be now cheaper than they used to be, and if that's the case, that could be a method that they go down, because that would fall in line with them kind of like investigating motion control stuff. Other things they could try maybe would be like more eye tracking or head tracking stuff, but then they'd need to create stuff that would sit on your head, and I don't know that they want to do that. I think they're still burned from the Virtual Boy, and they're still worried about that, but we do know that they've tried VR in the past, and they're not opposed to it, especially because of, what was it called? Labo? There was a Labo set that had like a VR headset light, so I could see them maybe also potentially investigating some kind of VR thing, but if they do it, it's going to be a cheap version of VR. It's not going to be competing with the current other stuff. And that's why I don't necessarily think that's the path they'll take, because I don't even think the mainstream VR is there yet. And I don't think that the technology is cheap enough that they would want to test the water right now. And especially with a cheaper option, it just wouldn't feel as good. And like what Nintendo likes to do is take technology that's older and like package it in a way that feels good. That's like that's been their whole strategy the whole time, right? Like, going back to the Game & Watch, it's just calculator tech that they turned into a game. Or the Game Boy, which is like really cheap chips and a low quality-ish screen from that era. But because of that, it was really good on batteries, and they were able to package it into a good feeling unit that was like a good amount of weight, but not like crazy. And like get a good experience out of it. Even though like at the time, like the Game Gear wasn't released too much later. It had a full color screen and a backlight and all that kind of stuff. Nintendo didn't do that because they knew that it would cost too much and that it would take up a ton of batteries and just wouldn't work for the consumer in the long run. So yeah, I love my Game Boy too. It was awesome. I had a Game Boy Color. It was great. Oh, you had the old gray one? That's wicked. But yeah, so I don't like... So knowing that that's been their strategy forever, to take like older technology that's become cheaper, but use it in newer ways and package it in a way that is better, like a good consumer experience. Like that's what their goal is at the very least. You can argue about like how successful they were with that at certain points in time and all that kind of stuff. Basically, I always look to like what other technologies could they incorporate that are cheap-ish, that could add something interesting to a game in some way, because that's generally what they're trying to find. So, like, what has become cheaper in time? Cameras. I heard rumors of a webcam being integrated in some way. I think it's quite possible that they integrate some camera technology back. They've done it with the 3DS and the DSi, so I don't think that's against the grain. It's cheap. They could easily do it. They could add some tracking. It could do a bunch of different things for that. So they could do, you know, some AR stuff and all the things that they played with the 3DS and to some degree the Wii U. And I think that that's certainly down that kind of like road that they've been going down, is they're trying to investigate more of those kinds of options, finding ways to like make games more integrated into life in some way. That seems to have been like a plan of theirs for a long time. So definitely looking down those roads. So like, I don't know, it could be another handheld-ish device, but it's gonna be something that also functions as a home console if it's also handheld, right? But it's possible that they just go straight to a full console, like a home-only console, and then just, as I was saying, like sell a Switch Lite, right? Or like a Switch Mini, or something along those lines. Like a light. And then use that, like basically turn the Switch into their handheld device at a lower price than it's currently, because the technology's gotten cheaper, theoretically. And then be able to like keep the library that they've currently got, but shift it more towards being their handheld only as time goes on, which is kind of what they did with like the 2DS when they got rid of the 3D portion of that. Yeah, like I would love to have like a slightly different, like a Game Boy form factor Switch. Like the controller is below the screen, smaller screen, but a smaller overall like profile just to have as a port. Okay. So, option number one is Nintendo goes with two different things again. They have a handheld line and a home console line of some kind. Handheld being a continuation of the Switch in some capacity, probably just equating to a cheaper, more portable version of what we have. And wow, these things are brutal. I think I'm gonna get wiped here. That's fine though. I'm okay with that. And then the home console being probably something that would be going down the lines of the stuff that they've been testing for a while, which would be something with either AR or VR stuff in mind. It may not be a true VR experience. I would expect it to be more like some kind of motion control using some kind of tracking software, getting us closer to VR, but not having the cost of the headset, which I think is the thing they're trying to avoid. So that's option one, which is not the option I think is going to happen, but that's an option I see happening potentially. In which case, like the rumors about that people are having that, like about the Switch and stuff like that, like most of the rumors I think are just 100% false. Like the idea of like a sliding remote just makes no sense to me. I don't see how that could work into gameplay. Holding that portably just would make it impossible to hold the thing. There's no real way to make that work. I've seen like concept art for it a bunch of times and I'm like, what are you people on? But like some other Switch that is using a maybe more modern chip is possible, but it would be for a cost reduction. If in my perspective is it would be like maybe a newer Tegra chip that just is cheaper in some way, maybe the nanometer process that it's being manufactured on is like, oh okay, I'm gonna go back to Magic Hint and then heal up. Maybe the what was I saying? Yeah, maybe they have a nanometer process that's cheaper because it's being more mass manufactured these days. Maybe there's a new Tegra chip from NVIDIA that is just cheaper to produce. I could definitely see that happen. But so that's one option. Another option would be to keep going down this other route this is the one I think is, so what I think is gonna happen. I think that the next console is going to be closer to a successor to the Wii U than to the Switch, but keeping what they've learned from the Switch. What I mean by that is I think that what we all hoped the Wii U would be is effectively what they're gonna do for the next console. That's my opinion. Is like basically we're gonna get a dockable handheld where the dock is a performance boost, like a true performance boost. So people have like had rumors about them having like a 4K gaming experience, like capable Switch basically for the next console. And I believe that the only way that they would do that is if they had the Switch itself be like maybe a slightly better, maybe like an upgrade to the Tegra chip, so it would be like the next generation of Tegra chip, hopefully incorporating some of NVIDIA's newer AI upscaling technology stuff, so that the handheld itself, you could render something at like 720p and have it AI upscale to like 1080p, and the handheld, that's going to be more than enough. So that's what I would think for the actual handheld device itself, but then I think it would have a dock, and that dock would have additional compute power and RAM, and maybe even be able to be sold separately, so that you could start by buying just the handheld, and then buy the console, the dock, as a separate unit to add on an extra cost. But like basically like what they tried to do with the Wii U in some way, having like a deluxe model and a base model. You have like a base model, which would be, here's the handheld version of the console. You cannot use this with your TV, but it's more powerful than the previous one. It will play the modern games. But if you want to hook it up to your TV, you can get this dock. And this dock has more RAM in it, a little bit of a boost to like an extra CPU effectively, or GPU that it can offload power to, or offload like performance to, which is like, people were speculating this when the Switch was announced, but I was like, that's probably not going to happen, unfortunately, because it was just too expensive at the time, but it's what I would have hoped for. But I think it makes a lot of sense to do it this way, because you could have it be not an actual dock. I mean, it could function also as a dock so that it can charge it and whatever, but it could function like the Wii U. It could use some kind of radio communication with the unit so that you could play dual screen games. And the reason I think that that's something they would definitely consider, even though some people may be like, well, it failed in the Wii U, why would you do that? The 3DS and the DS were extremely popular consoles, and you cannot play those games now. And there's no way you could port that to anything because it requires the two-screen experience. But they were super, super successful. Wouldn't you want to have the ability to up-port all of those wonderful games that people would pay for to a new console? I don't think they're going to make another DS era thing, but if you had a two-screen experience, you could port DS games, 3DS games, like virtual console-wise, you just go, hey, DS virtual console, but then upscale port 3DS games for a bunch of money, and you could bring Wii U games over in their true style and just update them for HD. So I think if I were Nintendo, that's what I would have investigated. Is I would have gone, okay, we have these consoles that were super successful with great libraries of games that we want to be able to continue profit off of. How do we bring that experience forward? And how do we use the stuff we've learned in the last couple of console generations to bring the whole thing forward? I would be like, oh, well, we want to do the Wii U, but we want the gamepad to be able to do what the Switch has done, which is be completely separate. And we also want to address everybody's concerns around like 4K and whatever. So maybe if we can't even, maybe we still won't be able to natively render in 4K, but if we can use a Tegra chip with the AI upscaling technology that NVIDIA has in some of their other stuff, like for DLSS stuff, then we could upscale to 4K from maybe even a 2K image, and it would look good, because the DLSS stuff is good. It's like if you could integrate, if NVIDIA could get somebody to integrate DLSS into a console rather than per game, it could be very, very good. Right now, the problem is that it's up to the developer to individually introduce it into each game, but if it was part of the tool set that you get when you're trying to build for the console, I think that that could be a major benefit. Because it means that every single game built for that console will have DLSS. So NVIDIA would want to push that because it would help them get more things using DLSS, which would be better for them selling cards in the future. And it would be super beneficial for a system like the Switch, which doesn't need to then have all the power to be able to render 4K natively on the handheld. It could upscale it, and it would look good. So that's where that's my bet. My bet is they're doing something that's going to use that kind of technology, whether that's built into the base station of some kind, the dock that's going to interact with the TV, so that you can have a two-screen experience. That's what I'm guessing. And people are saying there's probably going to be some kind of camera experience in there. I think that that makes a lot of sense, especially if they go this route, because it means that they can use things from the DSi and they can use things from the 3DS that both use cameras. Right now, they don't have a camera on the Switch. That doesn't mean they couldn't add one, but I think that it would make more sense to do it into a new console, and I think that this would mean that they basically, if they did this, it would be a super logical step forward. It would also still create a bunch of new experiences, because you're still bringing that dual screen experience back in, which wasn't fully explored in the Switch or in the Wii U era, but has been explored on handhelds, but not with like the console level graphic fidelity. And then on top of that, you add in like maybe one or two other features that they're testing out. So they tested like the IR tracking on the one Switch Joy-Con. Now, it didn't get really adopted. I don't think it needed to be adopted, because the integration was kind of weird. But I could see them adding some more of that in there to try to get more, like, I can see them still making more and more steps towards doing some kind of AR, VR experience, because that seems to be where they're trying to head. They're just testing out the water with every new console, right? Ever since even the GameCube. So the GameCube had an optional microphone with certain games. That's sort of part of that. But then in the Switch, or in the Wii, we got the motion controls with the tracking. And then from there, we got the Wii U, which then also had a camera involved, which could do some things. Then the DS line had in the 3DS you had the AR games that they were playing with. I think it makes, and then in the Switch you have the infrared sensor. I think they're still trying to like test the water out and figure out the best way to do AR or VR. And I think that it makes, I would not bet against them putting in some kind of new method of doing it, or like continuing on the path that they've been going down with one of those methods. If they found that the IR actually does work, but they needed to integrate it more holistically, I would see that possibly happening. But something like that wouldn't be out of the ordinary. I think that we can expect at least one or two new technologies or an advancement of one of those technologies in there. But I think that the main thing is going to be an advancement of the Wii U to Switch formula. Because it just seems like that is also a direction that they're like, this is where we want to go. And it just makes sense. I mean, it's something that the other console manufacturers aren't thinking about right now. But it would be so strong to do something like that. Like, PlayStation is sort of trying to compete with it now by having like the weird PlayStation controller that costs like the same amount as a Switch, basically, just to have a screen that connects to your PlayStation. But that thing's not going to be able to play games away from your console, so it's not going to compete in the same way. Like if I think they're going to do, if they're going to do what I think they're going to do, it's going to be way beyond what Sony is doing with their weird PlayStation 5 controller. And I think that would be an awesome thing for the industry because it would allow for a lot of new experiences. And I just think that that's probably the way they're going to go. Now, the other option is that they do something completely out of left field that nobody's expecting at all, with some completely different technology that nobody was considering, which has happened several times in the past, and has not always been a bad thing. I just think that at this time, because the Wii U was so recent and it was not a success, and because other technologies really haven't come down, like the other technologies that I can think of that would be involved in gaming, like you have haptic touch stuff, you have motion tracking for finger gesture controls, you have what else has come around recently, well, in the last few generations that would be beneficial to gaming in some way. Facial tracking, eye tracking, all that kind of stuff. I think it's too expensive right now for them to consider putting into their next console. So for that reason, I think that that's a possibility for the console after the next console, that they go in one of those directions. But I think that for the next console, what they're going to do is play it a little bit safe, but still make a major step forward by doing something like a hybrid console, but like a hybrid console with a significant amount more power. And that is a dual screen experience because it will greatly allow them to take advantage of their library. So yeah. Any thoughts? And I would be super excited for that experience, because if so, it would probably be backwards compatible with Switch, which would be great. Ooh, sweet. Yeah, I just got the Franklin badge to tick off and take out an enemy. That was awesome. Yeah, I think taking the library forward makes sense too, but I think like not just taking the current library forward, but being able to take like past library forward, because it's just, it has been so successful for them. They've been able to like upport so many things, and it's been a huge success. Dual screen on the TVs. So it would work exactly like the Wii U. Basically, you'd have a station that would sit hooked up to the TV that would have its own set of RAM, its own processing unit that would communicate with the handheld. That you would have the handheld. You'd have the option in some games to have the handheld mirror the screen, so it wouldn't be like they wouldn't force the developers this time around, because they had that problem with the previous generation, to have a dual screen experience. But I think that they would incentivize you to use the dual screen experience. And basically what it would be is you'd have the Switch handheld, like think of the Switch as the handheld unit for this next console, right? So you'd have a station that would hook up to your TV. It would have a separate processor, a separate amount of RAM, that would allow for more texture, like more textures to be on screen at a time at higher fidelity than would on the handheld. It would allow for a higher quality of image without hurting the the gameplay frame rate. And basically, like, so you'd have the option as a developer of, hold on, I'm thinking about the moveset I need to pass here. Of if you want to have it either mirror the screen like you do right now, basically when you dock the Switch, or you'd have it so that it would instead have the option to have a completely separate screen experience on the handheld. So the handheld would act like the lower screen on a DS or 3DS, or like the Wii U's gamepad. So it could be a separate a completely separate instance of what's going on. So effectively, from a game making perspective, you'd think of it as having two cameras. You have one camera that's a game view camera and one camera that's a UI camera maybe. Or you could have two cameras that both look at different things in the game. So yeah, the lower handheld, so the handheld is screen 2, right? So that's what I think would happen. Like you basically have like a portable console that is, you have a portable console and a dock. The dock could be, like, you could still use like a Pro controller or whatever, right? But the main thing would be the actual handheld console. It wouldn't be the dock. I don't think the dock would take in games. I think the dock would only be an add-on. So the handheld would have the game. When you launch a game, it would send information to the system. It would send the main processing is done on the handheld, but the system that's hooked up to the TV would allow for upscaling and higher res graphics to appear on the TV screen, right? Not those. And so, by doing that, you basically have like a two-screen experience, or you could have a two-screen experience, which is what I think they're going to do. That would, because then you could have DS games where you have like screen 1 is the upper screen, screen 2 is the handheld, and it's just like playing the DS. You just hold your thing up here and you can do whatever you need to do on the screen while you're also doing with the TV. How large the screen is, I think, is up for on the portable unit is up for question, and I don't know how, like, you'd need the handheld piece to be able to be a full console on its own, which means that they may consider selling two different sizes of it for people that want a smaller screen or a larger screen for portability. But my guess is, based on how Nintendo works normally, is they would start by releasing just a single unit and be like, this is the unit, and this is the home interface unit. I mean, games being two-screen in a Switch way is already a thing with the Wii U, right? So like, it would just be like a better Wii U experience, effectively. I don't know if they'd put out a portable screen too, but what I could see them doing is, those are my thoughts on the Switch 2. I wanted to get that out before any real things were announced on the Switch because I think it would be fun to see how close I get. But I've been thinking about that for a long time. Like, basically, since the Switch came out, I was like, wouldn't it have been great if that thing had a dock that was powered? And other people have said the same thing too, but I was like, they're probably not going to do it this generation because it's too late, and it, like, creating like the tech to do that into the console would have to be done from the beginning, and like doing it later would be very, very challenging. So yeah, I mean, I predicted basically 3 possible ways they could go there, but yeah, the main one I think is definitely doing a dual screen experience, because it just, from a business perspective, just straight up a business perspective, if you don't look at anything else, if I'm Nintendo and I want to make money and make sure that my next console is a success, how do I do that? If I try to compete by just making a Switch 2, a higher powered Switch, I'm gonna fail, because we already have the Steam Deck and other things coming out that are trying to take over that space. So I want to differentiate myself. I don't want my game library to be the only differentiating factor. That's never been their thing. They've always tried to do something that was slightly different. And that makes the most sense. And that's where Microsoft has failed in this race against Sony, is they've not done enough to distinguish their console. And I mean, like, that's just pure and simple. Like, if Microsoft brought something to the table that was unique to the console that really mattered in some way to gamers, like if they could create a unique experience that was actually like fun and different, not like the Kinect was too limiting, and that was a big problem. And it was a problem I saw right from the beginning, because, okay, just from like, if you're coming up with a new game movement mechanic, right? You have a couple of things you want to think about. So, if I'm making a new interface for gaming, it's important to think about it from a development perspective. What are the types of experiences people want to create and people want to play? And then how is this going to work for those things? And is there anything else we need to add in order to make that work? Fundamentally, to almost every game is the ability to move forward, backward, and side to side in an environment. The Kinect does not let you do those things. Locomotion cannot be done if you're looking at a character or a person on a 2D plane. It's just not possible. I mean, it is possible, but it would be a bad experience. You could have like gesture-based, like if I do this, then my character runs forward. But that would be stupid. So, like, the reason that the Wii was successful and that you can see the difference in the mentality, like Nintendo pretty much always comes out with like, we have a game that we want to build. We need to create a control scheme that will support this idea. That seems to be, seeing interviews past, that's like Nintendo's mentality always, is they build a console for a certain type of experience that they want to create. So with the Wii, they had the nunchuck so that you could move forward and backward in an environment, but you still had the motion controls. When Sony did the PlayStation Move, they just took that same idea and put joysticks onto the controllers so that you could move forward and backward in an environment. But then the Kinect was basically like the iToy, which was Sony's attempt at doing the same thing earlier. And you can't move forward and backward unless you give somebody a game controller. But like, you don't want to have a full Xbox controller, like a two-handed experience, when you're trying to do motion capture, because you need to be able to move your hands around, because that's the whole point. And Microsoft never released a like motion-tracked single-handed controller, and that was like the biggest problem. But that's why, like, and then they just gave up because it did so poorly. They just gave up and they just didn't innovate at all in the Xbox One era, basically. And then in the Xbox Series era, they just, again, did not push the thing forward. So there's no differentiator between their console and Sony. Like, and that's why they don't do well. But one of the things that, like, Nintendo's been always smart about is you need to always differentiate, because if something is successful, everybody's going to try to emulate it. So the Wii controllers were hell. I like the Wii controllers. But I mean, the Switch controllers are worse. This is the thing. Like, people, well, yeah, so the Pro, you mean the like this controller Pro you're meaning, or you're meaning like the motion controller Pro thing add-on? The Joy-Cons suck on the stupid tiny ones. Oh, the Pro control. So this Pro control, like this, yeah. Oh yeah, okay. So yeah, yes, I think that they should have made the Joy-Cons more ergonomic and with a joystick that was a little bit more robust. I agree. But motion control wise, they're also worse than the Wii. And it's something that people, when Skyward Sword was released for the Switch, people were like, "Oh, these controls are so bad. This is why nobody liked this game." It's not totally accurate. If you played Skyward Sword on the Wii or the Wii U, and you used the Motion Control Plus controllers, like the one that had the better motion control built in, it was a lot more responsive than the Switch ones are, and way closer to accurate. And yeah, maybe like some types of gameplay didn't really work that well, but I don't think it was a bad experience. I just think it was maybe not the experience that everybody wanted to experience, and that's fine. So the advantage that the Wii has over the Switch for tracking is that the Wii can have pinpoint accuracy if it uses the IR sensor, like period, like 100% perfect tracking. Whereas the Switch can't. well, it's a multi-sensor based thing, but it's basically gyro. And gyro can't be like it's basically like just because of the way that it's implemented, it can never be perfect. But I would say that like maybe not every game needs to have motion tracking, and I totally agree with that, and it's not a great experience for every type of game. But I think there are certain types of games that the motion tracking is awesome for. Like certain types of shooters and stuff, they were great on the Wii. I don't think that everybody enjoyed them because people just didn't understand, like, people don't like necessarily having good aim. But I liked it. I thought that once you get used to it, like, the ability to, like, shoot things on the screen like you're actually shooting a real gun rather than having, like, a controller where you're just like, come on, aim up, aim down. It was so much more fun to be able to quickly be able to go boom, boom, boom on the screen and actually be able to have pinpoint accuracy. Like, the rail shooters that Resident Evil made were awesome. Also, what was the other one? So, for example, a good example of where I think like people were wrong and that they just weren't used to it and didn't give it enough time was Red Steel, which was Ubisoft's first game for the console that was like motion tracked. Red Steel has great controls. Well, I wouldn't say great, but like pretty good controls for what they were trying to do that made the game feel really fun and unique once you got into it. It's just that it takes a while to learn because people were used to using controller forever. So like the motion control stuff was not like natural to them. Yeah, so I mean, that's what. So yeah, you're saying it's you don't want to have it so that if you lie sideways you can't play the game, and I get that. But I don't think that like every experience needs to have motion controls. But I also don't think that like I think that some games are better to force you to be like in a situation that you're kind of doing that. And I think like if games, either if it's a game that didn't like it, that motion controls weren't like necessity to the experience, then they should give you the option. But like a game like Red Steel, where the whole thing is about feeling like you're a Yakuza member, I guess, and being able to like swing a sword at any time and then shoot at things on the screen, you want to be able to do that with motion controls. It feels better. You could do it with a controller, but it's just going to feel kind of like a generic thing. But with adding the motion controls to it and making it a big thing, you can really make it feel like you're there in some way, like give you more presence in game. And like that's what they were going for. So like I wouldn't want to divorce the motion controls from that experience. Yeah, well, and so like the Switch ones just can never do that because the Switch ones are gyro based, so you could never really do it from like a non-perfectly upright position, which is a problem. But like with the Wii tracking, theoretically, it should be fine if you were lying down and using it because it would be based on the IR tracking, not the gyro, not the gyro. And I mean, the reviews for Red Steel were like really bad because again, like nobody was used to motion controls and they were trying to do a very precise motion control scheme, and so people just did not know what they were doing, and so people sucked at it, and that people were frustrated, so they said the game was bad. But I spent enough time, I beat the game, I like spent enough time to like get into it, and I had like a friend of mine would come over and we'd play it as multiplayer games, and they were great. It was great. But yeah, like if you're not used to the controls, you're gonna have a hard time with it for sure. Motion controls have their place. I think that like I'm not against them trying to do motion controls again. I think they should come up with a better method than the way that they were integrated in the Switch, because the Switch, it gives you the freedom of being able to not tie them to something. But if they're gonna have, like, so if the next console does what I think it's gonna do, and it's gonna have some kind of station as well as a separated console that you can take with you, then they can look back at doing an IR-based tracking again, which would mean that we could have better motion tracking again for games that we want it for. But I think having a hybrid console like that has both a home version and a console, like a take with you version, is going to necessitate developers allowing for motion controls on versus off, or at the very least, like very clearly stating like this game is a motion control game versus a non-motion control game. And I think that that's good enough, generally speaking. Like, I think that it's good enough to be like, we're gonna have some games be motion controlled and some games not, and it's up to you, and we'll put and make sure it's on the packaging like which one is which. And as long as it's clear, I think that that's fine for the end user, and yeah. You're just gonna know what to expect. But like games like Just Dance, for example, or Raymond's Raving Rabbids, like those are great games because of their motion controls, and if you remove the motion controls, you just couldn't have those kinds of games, right? I think like those games are exactly why we want motion controls. You don't need every game to have it, it's just that it's great to have it as an option. Like, and another feature on the Switch that I don't think was very utilized, which I think was a super cool idea, but it was just hard to implement, is the HD rumble idea. And the only game I know that people have like really been like, wow, this was an amazing experience, was the 1-2 Switch, as far as I'm aware. Every other game just felt like they just used rumble as rumble. And I'm not opposed to that necessarily, but like, I just think it would be cool to have more games utilize HD rumble in a way that's actually like cool and tactile. The rumble? Like, how is the rumble supposed to work? So the idea behind HD rumble is that it's a more accurately tunable rumble feature. So, in 1-2 Switch, or like there was apparently I don't know if the demo was in 1-2 Switch, but basically like the rumble of the Switch is theoretically capable of you being able to like shake the Joy-Con controller and sense how many ice cubes are in something, right? Like, so if you have a cocktail shaker and your Joy-Con is representing that cocktail shaker, you should theoretically be able to like go like this, and you could feel like different ice cubes in the way that the rumble works. That's super cool. And apparently it works. It's just hard to implement or something because nobody really does it. But in 1-2 Switch, apparently like it's really good. And like when it was first announced, people were blown away by it, but then it just never got utilized by developers. Which sucks because I think that experience would be super, super cool. Yeah, so I don't know like how they would go about like making that easier to implement, but I would love to see more implementation of that because that would be so sick. I think the island goes nowhere. Yeah, okay. So where are we going from here? But yeah, it was like basically not utilized. So that's a feature that I think that was underutilized, and I think it. The only game I saw that utilized an interesting implementation of the rumble for Switch outside of like, I don't know really. Like most of the games I've played, just I haven't felt like the rumble was like that like that crazy. But was not Chicory, or no, maybe it was Chicory, or no, was it Wandersong? One of Greg's games, either Wandersong or Chicory, where if you jumped, there was like a boing sound effect, but the boing came from the rumble. Like there's no speaker built into the controller, but like the controller made an audible boing when it rumbled when you jumped, and I was like, what? How did you do this? Like, this is so cool. If more people could like do that, that would be amazing. But like, it clearly just was not that accessible or something because like there's so few people who've done it. But yeah, the HD rumble Like the only like 2 implementations I've heard of it, both were awesome and would be super cool as a gameplay add-on. But the problem is like you're doing it specifically for the Switch, and it's not really like, it's like good audio, right? Good soundtrack, good sound effects make a good game better, and can really make a good game in some cases. But like a better implementation of a surround sound effect will make only a certain number of games better, whereas like this game wouldn't benefit from a better surround sound effect, right? Like it might be a fun quirk that you might want to introduce, but like doing this as surround is not gonna like add a lot. Even like making this in stereo versus mono is not gonna add a lot. The same is kind of true for the way that the HD Rumble works. Like some games would theoretically benefit from it significantly, and it would make all games benefit from it to some degree, but it's not gonna be like it's not gonna make or break most games, so most people just didn't want to go through the hassle of implementing it, especially if it's gonna be put on other consoles. And I think that's the primary thing that happened, was that people still want to be able to port to other consoles, and other consoles were just not implementing a similar thing, so most people just didn't bother. I think the PlayStation controller is capable of some kind of like HD Rumble kind of thing. I don't remember what they called it. Like, again, I just don't think it's that utilized, and it wasn't, the PS5 wasn't out right away, so, again, it's kind of hard to, like, convince somebody to use a feature that's only going to be used on one of 2 consoles, and, like, PC is a bigger market than people thought it was going to be in some ways. For years, people were like, PC is dead, and all that kind of stuff. So, like, there's always been a reluctance to, like, work on PC ports, and things like HD Rumble would just never work on PC because there's no like console manufacturer or no controller manufacturers for PC controllers that are actually going to go out of their way to do that, probably, because there's no real value added to it, for the most part. So for that reason, people just like, if they're trying to port to as many consoles as possible, especially like indies and stuff, like they're not going to spend the time to make a better experience for one console versus another console necessarily, which is unfortunate. But like that's again part of the issue I was talking about earlier, where I don't feel like the consoles have done enough to distinguish themselves. If, for example, like Sony tried to make a console that was distinguished from the PC experience, even, whereas right now it's really not, then that would theoretically make people have to develop each version slightly differently for each console. And although that would cost a bit more for development when you're porting, it would be a better thing for the industry as a whole, because it would create more competition and it would create more innovation in the space, and it would mean that we would get more unique experiences on more things. And I think that that's just better. Like, it's better when we have more unique experiences rather than just like, here's the 18th installment of this, because we can just keep porting up and up and up because everybody's not changing the control schemes or anything else. And that's effectively what happened. And that's, I think, why one of the main reasons why HD Rumble wasn't adopted is that everybody's just like, well, lowest effort thing possible, okay, we're just gonna port. Yeah, well, like, it's not untrue though. Like, if you have, like, so you're saying that if the PC experience being similar to Sony is a laugh out loud kind of thing. But it's not untrue. I mean, effectively, from the last generation onward, all consoles that were not Nintendo have just been PCs in a box. They have not done anything differently. They take PC CPUs slightly modified for the console to make them lower power and a couple of things. But basically, they just take actual PC components, shove them into a box, and sell them. And that's why, like, now consoles cost almost as much as buying a new PC. They're not quite there because they have a larger, well, because they have fewer parts, and because they have like more units they can sell individually, which means that they can have larger scale, which gives them a cheaper ability. But other than that, they're effectively just a PC in a box. It's just, Here's a GPU that is just a modified version of a GPU from a PC. Here's a CPU that is a slightly modified version of a CPU from a PC. We're just soldering them onto a motherboard instead of having them socketable because we don't need to. And so we're like custom building our motherboards to have the power delivery and all that kind of stuff all built in, which makes it cheaper because you don't have all those cables. You don't have separated cables. You don't have extra motherboards like you would have right now with like a GPU having a separate motherboard from the main thing. You can share the RAM, so it makes it a little bit cheaper. But effectively, it's just a PC in a box. And that's, I mean, that happened last generation, and that's continued this generation, and that's why, like, it's also why we're getting a lot, like, Sony's finally going, yeah, we should just port our library over to PC, because, like, why are we losing money by making people buy this hardware that costs us money, when we could just sell all of the software, which we make most of our money on PC, which is, to me, the crazy thing about, like, some companies that have been holding off doing that forever. Why didn't you just do that? Like, PC isn't directly competing with your console, except now it is because you haven't bothered innovating at all. And you're losing out potential sales to a larger audience. Sweet, we made it through, theoretically. It'd be cool to see what Nintendo does, see if they do something weird. I hope that they do what I said that they were gonna do, because that would still be weird enough that nobody would be able to compete with it. If they do something super, super weird, it depends on what they do. They've failed a couple of times. The Wii U was... The problem with the Wii U is that it's hard to tell what was truly the reason it failed. Because I think the implementation wasn't the best, but it also wasn't terrible. But the marketing was so bad that it's really hard to tell if it was the marketing issue that killed it, if it was the specs being way too low. Like, the RAM was a huge issue. And then, like, there is the implementation, but I don't think the implementation is as much of a contributing factor. Joy-Con things in the Wii U is a problem. The camera's so annoying. I mean, those are development problems. Those aren't the console problems, though. Like, somebody screwed up how they implemented the camera, or how they implemented the like, controllers. That's on the developer, not on the console. My argument for it being a development issue and not the actual Wii U issue is that, like, Arkham City Armored Edition, which was the Switch or the Wii U version, the gamepad was there as a mini-map and a way to interact with a couple mini-games, and other than that, you just basically got the pure gameplay experience on the console. And it was great. I don't think that's why it tanked, though. Like, a couple of games doing a bad implementation on the console is not gonna tank a console completely. There's a couple of different things that happened. First of all, EA did an absolutely crappy port of their FIFA game, the first FIFA game, over to the Wii U. What they did was they took the previous year's game and they just sent that to the console rather than doing the current year's game, but with an updated roster. So, like, it showed that they were just not caring about supporting it at all. So when you have a third-party developer that's like that big do that, it's not a good showing, and that was on the specs more than it was anything else. Like, Nintendo not giving enough RAM to make anything actually, like, work is their fault. But the Wii, yeah, so you're saying the Wii U felt like it was for kids, but I would argue that it was way more adult-focused than the Wii was. I mean, they had a Pro controller for it that they sold, like, right away, for example. And, like, in their first set of games, like, was Zombie U, which is an M-rated game. Like that was like a launch title, and they wouldn't have asked Ubisoft to create for them like an M-rated title right off the bat if they weren't serious about making it available for multiple people. Not only that, but like Call of Duty was one of the first games on the console as well. Yeah, the way it was marketed, but the thing is, I think the marketing was just a failure completely. Like, it wasn't just that it was, like, I don't even know if the console was marketed towards a younger audience, because I saw almost no advertising compared to what the Wii did. Yeah, so I don't know, I like almost saw no advertisement for the Wii U after that horrible E3 conference, where they just kind of totally fumbled it. Which I think is the main issue, is they just didn't market it. And the few little marketing they did not do enough to distinguish it from the Wii. And that was a big problem. And I, like, straight up calling it the Wii U was the problem. Like, full stop, that was the issue. If they'd called it something else that didn't include Wii, that would have been a huge difference in terms of like the ability to market that thing. I think that was the biggest failure of the marketing. I don't necessarily think it was the marketing of the console itself, like, although I do think they fumbled that a bit, but I didn't see enough, like, with the Wii marketing campaign, I can very much recall what that looked like. They had like the Wii would like to play thing where people would drive around with this a mini, or not a mini, a smart car, and go up to like random people and like hand them a Wiimote and say, we would like to play, and then they would play like sports, like tennis usually, or something like that, and it was just showing like you can play this with anybody, and like it's a motion controlled thing, and that was a really solid ad campaign. But with the Wii U, I don't remember anything about the campaign. Like, other than the opening, like, hey, this is a game console at E3 kind of thing, where they didn't even show the console except in the background shot. I don't recall seeing anything about, like, how the console was played, people enjoying it, what titles were on it. There wasn't, like I didn't see any marketing for it, really. And I think that was like, clearly they knew that they had failed, but like, I would have then tried, but they just didn't. Or it felt like they didn't. Yeah, so in summary, the Wii U was a huge failure, and it wasn't one thing. It was a lot of things compounded, but like, having played quite a bit of the Wii U, I enjoyed it. I thought like when it was utilized well, it was a good console, and it was fun. It's just, the amount of RAM that they shipped it with was just simply too low. The Wii U, I really enjoyed it when it was utilized well, but it wasn't always utilized well, and that was a problem. But it also definitely was under spec'd. It would have been nice to have had more RAM, because then more ports would have been made from other consoles, and that was a big problem. Is they just didn't get third-party developer support because it was too difficult for people to downgrade their game enough and still have it visibly look okay. That's funny. I have to reread this. This is hilarious. Okay, so this game I heard of was titled EarthBound. Don't know exactly why, because it really doesn't matter. So you shouldn't judge a book by its cover. Don't judge a game by its title. And this is like the developer going, we had no idea what to call this thing, so we called it this thing, and we're gonna put an apology for it through a character just saying like, who cares? This is just the title we gave it. That's ridiculous. But yeah, I mean, so the reason we were talking about the Wii U is that it was a failure, and Nintendo's failed a couple of times, which is, so like, yeah, doing something different has not always been successful for them, but it has been successful for them. When they've been successful, it's been because they've done something different, right? Like, they've never done a successful console because it was the most powerful or anything like that. Other than the SNES, but that was unintentional. Like, they just accidentally ended up coming up with the most powerful console at the time because they needed to put something out to compete with what was coming out, and they didn't realize that they were going to be putting out something that was quite a bit more powerful, basically. At least that's what I was told and what I've heard. But it's not like, it makes sense because they wouldn't have gone to the effort of buying the most expensive parts at the time. It's just that, like, when they chose to compete, the parts were just cheaper at the time because they came in a bit late in that cycle. Has it been the fault of trying new technology, or has it been like other issues? And I mean, some of it has been technology, definitely. This is PlayStation. Like the Virtual Boy, for example, is a great example of, like, they clearly did not do a good job in getting something that was like good technology for that time period. So like, if we think about the consoles in the past, the ones that have done well, so like NES did well, the Game & Watch series did well for what it was. Game Boy, obviously, Game Boy Advance, SP, NES, SNES, N64 did pretty well, despite the fact that people say it didn't. But if you look at the sales numbers today, and you look at like where it ended up, it was in third place, but it was in third place by like a very slim margin to the second place. Or was it? Oh, sorry. PlayStation 1 versus N64? Yeah, so it lost to the PlayStation. So, no, it didn't do that well. The GameCube was the one I was thinking of. So the GameCube, it did come in third place. Yeah, so the GameCube came in third place to the PS2 and the Xbox, but it was pretty close to the Xbox in sales. Oh, I have to go buy a ticket again. Oh, that sucks. And the PS2 won, like, for a number of reasons. Yeah, so the PS1 was the best-selling console by like a landslide in the previous era. So the PS2 being fully backwards compatible meant you had a library of like 1,000 games just by buying the PS2. Plus it was a DVD player, and it was relatively affordable for a DVD player at the time, not even counting it like being a game console. So the fact that it was like one of the best DVD players at the time, and it was this game console that had a built-in library of over 1,000 games because of the PS1, with a huge install base from the PS1, meant it was like a pretty much no-brainer for most people to buy it in that era. So like that was like a major contributing factor to its success. So you really have to look at like, okay, who was in second place and third place, and the fact that both Microsoft and Nintendo were so close. And I mean, Dreamcast was the other guy, and they were not close. So yeah, like Nintendo beat Dreamcast by a significant margin, and they were within a few sales, like a few thousand sales of the Xbox. So it wasn't like a huge failure, despite people saying it was not very successful. I think they probably made out pretty well with that console. And if you look at like how the console was designed and kind of like the mentality of it and the way that they kind of do their consoles, or they had done up to that point, or at least the Wii U, is that they usually like have a console that, or like up to that point, it's been like, we're gonna have a console that's like a placeholder console to be competing against the current generation while we're innovating on something, and then the next generation to come out with the thing that they really wanted to do now that the technology is cheap enough to do so. And then they kind of alternate every generation. Like that's been the case since like the NES. So the NES came out, it was the main thing, and then you had the SNES come out, and it was like a holdover console basically. And then the N64 came out, and it was like, okay, there's a bunch of new technology. We've moved to 3D. We've done a bunch of new stuff. Rumble was one of the things they tried on that console. And then the GameCube was kind of like then the stopgap for the next set of consoles. And then yeah, so I mean after GameCube you had which they did test a couple of things out on, but clearly like they built the expansion bay, and they did put in like the ability to add in that internet connectivity, but it was only used for like one game. But then all that kind of technology get wrapped into the Wii, which was like what they clearly were working on. And then the Wii U was like a weird kind of in between. I think, again, it was like them testing out something that they wanted to do, but it wasn't quite there yet, as they were trying to keep up with the current gen consoles. But I think they just undershot a little bit further than like they had anticipated that the competition would go. And the N64 still did better than the Saturn did, for sure. So I wouldn't say it was a total failure either. And there were some significant hits on that console that people definitely refer back to. It just wasn't as successful as the PlayStation by like half or something like that. But it certainly killed the Saturn. Like the Saturn was, well, I mean, it didn't kill the Saturn. The Saturn was kind of a flop from the get-go for a number of reasons. But so like the failures that Nintendo's had console-wise, it would be like the Virtual Boy, obviously, the Wii U, pretty obviously. There was like, what else? There's a couple of peripherals that were not that successful, but some of them were cool ideas, like the e-reader. Man, this isn't like a full performance here. But like that's kind of it. So if we look at like the thing, oh, and like, was there a version of the Game Boy that wasn't? No, because the Game Boy was just a success, period. And I don't think they ever did do another handheld that was non-successful because they were pretty safe with it. Oh, here we go. This guy's Chad. So what was I going on about? Oh yeah. So have Nintendo's failures been because of the technology, or has it been mostly marketing? And I think it's kind of a per item basis at this point. But I think they have played it safe following any major failure, and so I think that it's not like we're not that far away from the Wii U. I think they're going to play it relatively safe for the next console. That's basically where I was going with this. It is possible that they play it less safe this time if they choose to go the route of like making a Switch Mini, basically, and like having something that's safe that can keep them going. But I think that the problem with that is that they've already waited too long if they were going to do that. Like, if they... So the normal console cycle for Nintendo is between 5 and 6 years. We're already at the end of the 6th year for the Switch, which means that, like, the time to have done this would have been last year, so that you'd still have the Switch be competitive as its own console. I think that because they're waiting till year 7, doing that is riskier because now there's a lot of competition in that space. Like like Steam Deck, Aya Neo, like all those other things that are basically just copying what they've done. Yeah, I mean, and their library is good, but like everybody who has a Switch already is not going to buy a new Switch because like unless it's like significantly different. But if it's just a mini, how many people are going to like have the home console that they currently have and then buy a mini? Not many. You're just trying to get like anybody who was like on the fence about it for the last few years who still wants to play some of the Nintendo games. You're going to be able to grab a few extra sales, and that's kind of what you're trying to do with it. That's like what happened with the Wii Mini. But yeah, I think like a Switch Mini would have been a cool idea, but I think they could have done it a while ago. Like, if they were going to do it, I think now would have been the time when they were releasing Mario Wonder. But they didn't. So my other prediction about the Switch, or the Switch successor, which I don't think is going to be called the Switch 2 because that would be idiotic. On a number of levels, because the Wii U did so badly, calling it a Switch 2 would be stupid, especially if it's a different concept of any kind. And I just don't see, again, I don't see them doing like a straight up Switch successor, so I just think that would be stupid. Yeah, so I think that the likely scenario is that they're not doing a Switch, that they're not going to call it Switch 2. But whatever the successor is, my other prediction is that it's going to come out either... So we're going to get either an announcement, like in... When is Tokyo Game Show? That's usually when they announce things like that, which I think is the end of this month or the end of next month. So I think that's when they would announce it, which means there's a possibility it could come out this year, but my guess is it's not coming out till next year. My guess is they do a reveal like they did with the Wii, where they like revealed how it looked, but I don't think it was playable at the event, if I remember correctly, or at least they've done that before. So I think that that's what they're probably going to do, something like that. They're going to announce it probably Tokyo Game Con this year. Tokyo Game Show this year, which will be like at the end of this month or next month, whenever that is. And it will, so we'll get a teaser about what it is and an idea of like how it's going to work out, and then probably a release the Christmas following, but not this Christmas, because I think it's too soon, especially considering Mario Wonder's just coming out. I mean, especially considering the games that are still announced to come out on Switch at this time, and like Mario Wonder, they released a new console for it. Well, even though it's the same console, it's just their skin for, it's not skin, but you know, like it's a new color for the Switch. I just don't see them putting out like a new color for the Switch like 2 months before wanting people to buy a new console, because you're like basically kneecapping your sales ahead of time to do that, right? Like you're going, hey, buy this new version of the Switch. Oh, and by the way, a couple months later, we're releasing a new console that you have to pay full price for. I don't think they would do that. That just seems crazy. It's possible, but like, I just don't see them doing that. I think they're smarter than that. At the earliest, I think we would see the new console coming out at the same time the Switch came out, like March. But I don't think they're going to do that. I think they've indicated themselves in an interview that that was an unusual scenario, and they're not going to do that again. I think it's more likely going to come out towards Christmas time next year. So that's my other prediction. If you like this discussion and want to participate in the future, check out @ProfsEnd streams on Twitch, where I'll be doing similar content a few days a week. You can also like this video and follow me here for more videos like this and other content in the future. Thanks for watching.